Welcome to Q&A, the show where I take you through the questions that you had and answer them in video format. A lot of questions to get through today, so let's just kind of jump through it. And by the way, if you want to make sure that your questions get on the show, I just schedule all of these posts, so they should come out exactly at the same time. 7:30 in the morning on Thursdays is when the Q&A question prompt should drop from now on, at least till throughout training camp. So if you want to make sure that your questions get asked, it will be up by Thursday morning every week consistently. I'm going to try to stick to that. But that's how you can make sure your questions get on this show. But now let's jump into the questions. And the first question today is from Corey, who says, a major concern that I've had in the past year was STEFANSKI's play calling and his inability to make necessary adjustments late in game. We always seem to have a lot of success offensively in the first half, only to often be shut down after halftime, only to be shut. Okay, do you think STEFANSKI has learned a lot from the past year and will improve on this? All right, man. See, look, here's the issue that I have with this, and this is the hole it's going to back me into. Every time I don't say anything positive about the guy who used to play quarterback for this team, people are going to get mad at me. Why are you still mad? But I have to talk about it because people have questions about last year. And when it comes to the offense, he was the root of a lot of problems last year. Not saying he's the root of the problems all the time, but last year, for whatever reason, maybe it was an injury, maybe it was whatever, he was part of the reason that the problems existed to the level that they did. And Kevin Stefanski's perceived play calling, I think, is a prime example of something that just was on Baker Mayfield more than people think. If you look at some of those play calls that people weren't happy with, guys were open. Baker didn't find them. His eyes weren't where they were supposed to be. If you look at what Kevin had to do and how his play calling changed from last year in 2020 to 2021, had a lot to do with his lack of trust in the quarterback position that grew throughout the year because the quarterback position was not executing at a reasonable level. I think if you get, and we all know Deshaun Watson, the play calling is going to be much different with Deshaun Watson. It's going to feel a lot different because he's probably going to execute at a much higher level. That's not even what I'm talking about. If he gets reasonable quarterback play, which he did not get last year, Baker was at the bottom of the league in terms of his QBR, Pro Football Focus grade. Whatever advanced metric you want to use, he was near the bottom, if not at the bottom. He was really, really bad last year. I don't want to sugarcoat how awful he was. Whatever reason you think that was, chalk it up to that. But the fact is that he was really bad last year. And when you have awful quarterback play, you rarely I want to ask you guys this question. Actually, when have you seen a team with bad quarterback play have good play calling? You know what I mean? Like that's the better question to ask is, when have you ever seen a team that's had bottom 25 quarterback play and have excellent play calling? It can happen. But even, I think the outlier in this, and maybe the best example is like Kyle Shanahan. It's a little bit different of a situation there with Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy doesn't want the ball more. But, still, even then people criticize Kyle Shanahan's play calling. So when you have bad quarterback play, your play calling is going to suffer. It just is what it is on that front. Look at Zach Taylor. Zach Taylor was not looked at as a good play caller before Joe Burrow got there in Cincinnati. All of a sudden, Joe Burrow gets there. What a play caller Zach Taylor is. Quarterback play has a ton to do with how fans perceive play calling, because what fans criticize play calling is on its execution. And if a quarterback is not executing at a reasonable level, play calling is going to look bad. And that's what happened last year. I don't think it was much about Stefanski. We know Stefanski, if he gets reasonable quarterback play from 2020, he can call a good game. The questions that I have about last year's offense aren't really about the play calling. The more I have evaluated the season during the offseason, it seems like it was quarterback play that made the play calling seem like it was awful. Not saying anybody's like an idiot for thinking otherwise, but I do think that the perception of the play calling is because of some things that the Browns have decided that they're going to fix in this offseason. All right, the next question is from Praise the Sun, who says, Do you think teams will respect our passing game with Brissett enough as our QB? Last year, they kept crushing in on our run game because they didn't respect the pass. I think it's a twofold thing because honestly, during the Baker Mayfield era, don't think teams have ever respected the pass. Not saying like they shouldn't have, or anything like that. Like, I just don't think there's ever been a time where Baker has forced the box to be less than what they've wanted it to be because he's out there. Maybe like there's been a couple of games here in 2020 where teams started to respect him, but for the most part, since 2018, I don't think anybody has really respected the pass game enough to empty out the box in a way that Deshaun Watson is going to be. So I don't think it's going to be much different for Brissett, not Brisket, by the way, Brissett. The run game is going to be much different to get loose with Brissett than it was last year, the year before, or the year before that, where Nick Chubb was having good years. I think Nick Chubb's production and the running game's production, much like last year, is going to hinge on how healthy this offensive line can stay. Remember, last year, both the tackles were out for a significant portion of time at the same time. That really affected the run game. And then you add on top of it that the quarterback play was awful. Yeah, that's going to hurt. If your offensive line stinks and your quarterback stinks, and all of a sudden, it's only the running back, he can't do it all by himself, right? But if the offensive line is healthy, I don't think it really matters as much how many teams want to crush in on the box, because the Browns have proven that they have good enough personnel to combat that. The issue was they just didn't have their personnel last year. A lot of guys got injured. I don't think the lack of production in the run game was as much about, and it had something to do with it. I'm not saying there's a zero factor in it, but I don't think it was as much as about teams not respecting the pass and stacking the box, as much as it was about the Browns just not having their full arsenal on the offensive line to be able to spring up these run game plays more often. But that being said, I think Brissett's a reasonable enough threat as a quarterback to where they're not going to do something ridiculous, right? Like, the thing that you're worried about, I think, is when teams go over the top. Like, I remember Joe Webb. He used to play for the Minnesota Vikings. Now, I know people make these off-base jokes about Lamar being a running back, but Joe Webb was truly somebody who could barely throw the football. Same thing with like a Tim Tebow, right? And when those dudes were out there, you would see some ridiculous boxes because they had no threat of throwing the ball at all. It was almost like you had a wild card quarterback out there. Jacoby Brissett's an actual QB, so I don't think you're going to see anything crazy like that because he's in the game. And if they do, it's probably a good thing because I think Brissett's good enough to beat them if they go crazy like that. Because, again, I think he's a reasonable level quarterback. I don't think he's like great. I don't think he's terrible. I think he's pretty average, and they're not going to do that to somebody who's pretty average. All right, the next question comes from Michael, who says, "Hey Q, love the content. Let's say Watson is suspended 6 games. Do you think 11 games in the season is enough for him to make offense gel and make a deep playoff run?" Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 6 games. I mean, that's not even a question. Absolutely. If Deshaun Watson has 11 games, I feel like, I know we're going to make a lot about rust. I don't know how much rust is a factor, because when I think about rust, I think about in what situations do you have to compare this to, right? Football players who've missed a year because of an injury, even though it's a little bit different than what Watson's coming through because he's not working back from an injury. The only thing that's going to hold him back is he hasn't played in a while. And what I think of is like a redshirt freshman, right? Like a redshirt freshman playing in college football, a full year out of playing but still healthy. And those guys, even though they're making a jump up level of play, the rust isn't really there. Right? Like, I don't know how much the rust factor is going to be for a professional, especially somebody who's been playing this game at a high level for a while now. I don't know if the rust factor is going to be as big as people want it to, and I don't think he needs more than 11 games to get back from this rust. But we'll see what else goes on with him, right? But I think he'll be fine. Next question comes from Gavin, who says, what do you think our division record will be if Brissett played for 8 games? So Watson's suspension, 8 games. The key difference though between 6 and 8 is a big difference, I would say, right? Not saying the season's over if he gets 8. I don't even think the season's over if he gets the whole season, because I still think the Browns can make the playoffs. But the difference between 6 to 8 games is significant because week 6, 1 to 6, you only play one division game, and it's a Thursday night game at home. Historically, Thursday night games at home favor the home team, and it's versus what's projected to be one of the weaker teams in the division in Pittsburgh. So that's a favorable spot, right? So weeks 1 through 6, you play an NFC game. I think you play 2 NFC games. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. I don't think you play 2. I think he's only the one against Carolina. So you have an NFC game, which doesn't count as much in tiebreakers, and one division game. So even if, let's say, you come out of that stretch, 500, you'll be fine from tiebreakers and division standings. But if it's 8 games, you add 2 more division games. It's a game on the road against Baltimore, and it's a home game on Monday night versus Cincinnati. So those are 2 tough spots, right? I think the division record, I would say I think no matter who's the quarterback, you win that Thursday night game against Pittsburgh. The game at M&T Bank versus the Ravens, I don't think you win that with Brissett. And I think the Monday night game against Cincinnati is a toss-up between if Brissett's out there. I think it's 50-50. It can go either way. So it can either be 2-1 or 1-2. But that's what it would be. But that is something to keep note of, man. The difference between 6 and 8 games, a little bit more significant if you look at who those extra 2 weeks would leave Watson out for, because those are division games. And division games, in the pantheon of tiebreakers, division games are at the absolute top. Then it's AFC games. Then it's every other game. But that is something to keep note of and think about as we wait for the suspension to drop, which we'll probably be waiting for a little while here. Dale says, on day 1 of training camp, there was a clip of a play where Watson faked a handoff to Chubb and dumped it off the Hunt. Is this something we'll see? We are so thirsty for this double Chubb and Hunt backfield. Yeah, probably, man. Probably. They're not keeping a fullback, so you're going to see them. I think we'll see what they do with Dearness, but I think also keeping Chubb and Hunt out there might be a way to kind of work in a third running back if they feel like that's what they want to do, and give Dearness some more touches. But yeah, they'll probably give you guys what you've been asking for quite a while, which is Chubb and Hunt in the backfield at the same time. And Twitter will rejoice if that play goes for more than 5 yards. Twitter will rejoice. The next question comes from Carter, who says, Q, are you bummed the Browns didn't reveal ultimate helmet this year? I don't know. I'm really indifferent on if they announced a white helmet. I'm not dying to see it, but I ain't against it. You know what I mean? If they do it, and I think it looks cool when they show the render, I'll be excited for it, but I'm not about to pound the table for an alternate helmet. All right, the next question comes from Master Dest, who says, I know you said Watson will elevate the wide receivers, but now that we see Schwartz is injury prone, my guy, what's the problem with getting a solid free agent wide receiver? We have the cap space. Do you believe the Browns aren't jumping the gun on this? I think you're jumping the gun on the whole Schwartz is injury prone thing. Look, man, we need to just accept that for these 2 position groups, the Browns don't feel like they're as dire as people outside the building do. For whatever reason, they could be right or wrong on this. But defensive tackle, they're not tripping. They're not tripping. I don't think it's a great situation that they got some of these young guys in. They're not tripping. Wide receiver, they're not tripping. And Anthony Schwartz isn't even injury prone, and he's day to day. He didn't hurt himself significantly. So I don't know where that comes from. But yeah, I know everybody wants him to sign in Ndamukong Suh. I know everybody wants the Browns to get Will Fuller or somebody like that. But it just ain't happening, man. It just ain't happening. They feel fine with what they have in the room. They feel like they need to develop young guys at those positions, and that's what they're going to do. I understand we want veterans out there, but this is what they want to do. and they're going to do that. But that's it for this week's Q&A. You guys have a great day. Have a good night.